Tim, I mean,
Guy.
a ridiculous quarter out of Google. It came seemingly out of nowhere, given the backdrop. I got to give them a lot of credit. Obviously, they were on pace for probably what would have been a record quarter. Obviously, March was problematic, but with that said, they pulled a rabbit out of the hat. I mean, that was a big surprise for me. I don't know about you.
Well, I actually pulled a Drake's coffee cake out of the hat, or is this a coffee cake junior? Remember, by the way, what's the difference between a Drake's coffee cake and a coffee cake junior? They're two different things. If you remember your snack cakes from back in the day,
you're going to clearly. I mean, I don't. What's the difference? My sense is size, given the junior status of the latter. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Well, I think it's as simple as Drake's versus Hostess, right?
Oh,
and then
right?
Yeah, and then you get into the very complex world of Ring Ding versus Ding Dong. And I was a Ring Ding fan, and I liked the foil. I liked the whole thing. I'm not even sure the Ding Dong came in foil. But this is a Coke versus Pepsi, McDonald's, Burger King. I think a Hostess versus Drake's. Where do you line up? And
Ring Ding.
Ring Ding.
And the great thing about the Ring Ding, amongst many great things, was, as you mentioned, the individually packaged in its own foil, as opposed to probably the Ding Dong, which came in a package too in the cellophane, which to me is somewhat problematic. What I'll say is this: what's the difference between a Ring Ding in terms of just the actual substance, right, and the ingredients, and a Yodel? To me, it's the only difference is the shape.
No. Hold on a second. The Ring Ding and the Ding Dong are both hockey puck,
right.
Chocolate covered cake. The Yodel, first of all, the Yodel, obviously Swiss or something, right? It's got to be European. And we were, very aspirational back then in this country. I think the Yodel, and did it have a counterpart? But the Yodel, you're right. It was all the same stuff.
All the same stuff.
Unlike the Suzy Q. Unlike the Suzy Q, which were just those two nice spongy pieces of chocolate cake with a very interesting vanilla pudding frosting of some kind in the middle. I thought the Suzy Q was actually my favorite, by the way.
I'll sell that to you. There was another one that came with like a peanut butter, but I mean, we're getting off track here. I think they would tend to get stale very quickly, as opposed to the Twinkie, which apparently will survive. You could have bought one in 1973 and you could be eating it now. You wouldn't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know what you're waiting for to eat your Suzy Q. You open that package, you eat the thing. If you leave it out on the counter, dude, it's gonna get stale. So I'll leave that out. But what's not stale is Google's business model. To me, in fact, it's actually looking forward and it's fresh. The things that I heard today were that their cloud business and YouTube businesses, which are not totally moving the needle at this point. The YouTube business is probably 11-12% of revenues. Was up 33% in terms of ad revenue. Okay, we want to see growth. We're getting growth. Cloud, which is about 2.7 billion, they reported today, up 52%. Think about how we reward Amazon for also a small revenue part of their business, but a high growth part of their business, which is their cloud. So yeah, I get that Google is certainly heavily in the storm that is consumer spending, which is ultimately ad spend. But I just think more resilient, and I think these other businesses that we waited for a long time to kind of become whatever icing on the cake. They were icing on the cake. They're now real cake, buddy. They're your coffee cake junior.
And I like this. I do like the thick cinnamon topping of a coffee cake. I find that to be fantastic. What I'll say is, you're right. I mean, and we've talked for quite some time that of the MAGA stocks or the FANG stocks, whatever we're calling. Google, in terms of valuation, is probably the most reasonable, and it's something you could absolutely get your arms around. And if you go back and look, I mean, they basically stole YouTube in terms of what it is now. You made the point. YouTube is now 10%, 11% of overall revenues, 33% year-over-year revenue growth. That's pretty tremendous stuff we're talking about, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. My biggest problem with Google, not that there is a problem, is that we went from an all-time high on February 23rd, traded on March 23rd. Basically where we traded post-market is just a 50% retracement of that entire move. We've gained a lot since then. I think the stock is now seriously north of 1,300 just before I got on with you. My instinct, though, and I'm probably going to be wrong here, is to take profits and look to buy it cheaper.
Yeah, well, you're right on the chart, but I got to tell you, I think this is not one you get too cute on the charts. You would have loved to have owned this stock at 1250 a couple months ago, and I realize this is another one of those, you own this as an investor, folks. And I think if you're thinking about how you want to trade this one, I think if anything, you follow some levels here on the downside that you get out of the way on a breakdown. But I think the question for you is, does this mean anything for Facebook tomorrow and the read across their ad business, which is obviously what it's all about there?
People definitely make the comparison. Obviously, I don't know this because I haven't looked, but I'm sure Facebook is up some sort of commensurate move. I don't know necessarily that you can make that leap. We're going to find out. I know Twitter was higher as well. I mean, they're three similar businesses, but they're three very separate and different businesses. We're going to find out. I'm not a big Facebook fan, and I don't think you are necessarily as well. I think it's a completely different model. I think Google's just a better company. So I think to the extent that Facebook is rallying, if you want to take a flyer into earnings tomorrow after the bell, you sell it here. But what I will say is, knowing you as well as I do, there's the reason why you're sitting there proudly with your shirt wide open with your "Where's My Bailout" t-shirt on once again, which means you're clearly exorcised about something.
I'm pissed, dude. You don't have to exercise me. I think, first of all, I own a small business, and whether you think I should be pissed about some dynamics of what's going on for the bailouts that are out there, I'm pissed because not only do I have two partners that this is their livelihood, but the way this has been handled on these PPP loans is I think absurd. First of all, I think it was so poorly thought out, and the fact that the LA Lakers and Auto Nation and Ruth's Chris can jump in there. And by the way, just because they backed out doesn't mean that public outcry should necessarily wane on that story. But the fact of the matter is that the banks and my bank's HSBC, and HSBC basically kicked this right back and said no mas. And if you're really doing something, you've got to push these banks around. You are their benefactor. You are the one that runs, essentially the Federal Reserve runs the banking system, but the U.S. Treasury is in charge here. Okay. And I find this whole thing so abominable, especially because the Treasury Secretary was out there telling you the money's there. It's all done. No problem. Go to it. And what also bothers me is a second derivative dynamic of this is, my complaining about this, when I tweeted about this today and whatever, people are like, leave your bipartisan politics alone. There's no partisanship here at all. I mean, this is ultimately, this is bipartisan. I mean, to me, this is a case of Americans being outraged by the system, and where there are some folks that are doing better than others. I mean, you can't tell me you snooze, you lose on the bailout package that was presented to the nation to be, a backstop. And so something that at this point is complete and utter chaos. The people that need the bailout are not getting the bailout in many cases.
Right on. I mean, the question I would ask, and I'm sure it's been answered, why the Lakers applying for it in the first place? I mean, how did that even happen? But that's neither here nor there. And you know what? I've never been a big Laker fan, but I'll tell you this. If you haven't seen it, you should watch this The Last Dance Bulls thing, because the first 4 episodes are ridiculous.
How about the fact that, the Worm had an integral role on both teams? I mean, who would have thought that? Who would have thought of 2 degrees of Dennis Rodman? Obviously, with all that's going on with Kim Jong-un these days, I hope Dennis is hanging in there. He's got to be emotionally just a mess right now with what's going on in North Korea.
Well, you know what? Maybe we can get the Worm on, and we can discuss his days as a San Antonio Spur. And with that, I'm going to bid you a farewell.
See you tomorrow.
Later.